Hello, welcome to Understanding Fractions. This PowerPoint display has been put together to help you with the introduction to fractions and to understand just what a fraction is. A fraction is part of a whole thing. That is to say that a whole object can be divided into many parts, and that part is called a fraction of the whole. If you had an apple, you could cut an apple into 2 pieces, or 4 pieces, 8 pieces or 6 pieces. Each piece is a fraction or part of the whole apple. This box that you can see in front of you, you can cut this box into 2 parts. When this one box is cut into 2 pieces, each piece is called a half, or written as a fraction, so 1/2. It's a half of the whole box. Fractions are smaller than 1. The number on the bottom is called the denominator, and it tells you how many pieces the box or the whole thing has been cut into. How many pieces has this one box been cut into? What is the denominator? How many pieces do you need to make one whole box? So if we look at it, how many pieces has this whole thing been cut into? It has been cut into 4 pieces. What is the denominator, or the bottom number? The denominator is 4. How many pieces go to make up the whole one box? You need 4 of these pieces together to make one whole box. The top number of this fraction is called the numerator. When the numerator equals the denominator, this equals one whole thing. So when the top number, 4, is the same as the bottom number, 4, then this is equal to one box. Some fractions have names for themselves. 1/2, when the denominator is 2 and the numerator is 1, 1/2, we call that half. When a fraction is written as 1/4, we call this a quarter. You can actually add fractions, such as in this example, 1/4 plus 1/4 is equal to 2 quarters, or 1/4 plus 1/4 is equal to 2/4. As you can see, 2/4, or 2/4, is the same as a half of the object. This is called writing the fraction in its simplest form, or reducing the fraction. When you get a fraction like 2/4, you can see that it can be made to look simpler by writing it as 1/2, because 2/4 is the same as 1/2. 2 quarters of an object is the same as 1/2 of an object. We said earlier that when the numerator, the top number, is equal to the denominator, the bottom number, you have a whole item, or 1. Let's have a look at this by adding the fractions. 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 is equal to 4 quarters. Now I want you to notice that you only add the numerators. You do not add the denominators, because the denominator tells you how many parts it's cut into, and numerator is telling you how many parts you're talking about. So here we are talking about 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 plus 1/4 is equal to 4/4. The top number is the same as the bottom number, so this is equal to 1. As you can see, when you add all the pieces together, you get one whole object again. If we have a look at this chart here, we see that 1/4 plus 1/4 is equal to a half. So, and the other green one is also 1/4 plus 1/4 is equal to a half. A half plus a half also equals 1 because you have 2 over 2. When the numerator is equal to the denominator, then the answer is equal to 1. Different fractions can have the same reduced value. This may seem confusing, but it isn't really. 5/10 takes up the same distance on the number line as 1/2. Let's take a moment and just have a look at this page. We have a number line here, and you can see the number line from 0 to 1, and it's been divided into 10 sections. Up above this number line, you'll see different representations of fractions. The top one shows one whole piece, 1 over 1. The denominator shows we're talking about one piece. How many pieces have been cut into? It's one whole piece. And the top number tells you how many parts we're talking about. Beneath the 1 over 1 fraction, we can see 1 over 2. The denominator tells us that this section has been cut into 2 pieces, or divided into 2 parts. Beneath this, we see that from 0 to 1 has been divided into 10 pieces. The denominator is 10, which tells us that the number has been cut into 10 parts, or that line has been cut into 10 parts. Now remember, fractions are smaller than 1. We use them to tell us how many times we cut up a cake or a pie or an item or an object. When we use them in maths, we are generally being told how many times we have divided up the space between 0 and 1. So let's go over this again. Remember that fractions are smaller than 1. We use them to tell us how many times we cut up a cake or a pie or a number. When we use them in maths, we are generally being told how many times we have divided up the space between 0 and 1. Now have a look at this number line. You'll see we've divided up the spaces beyond 1 as well, and beyond the number 2. So that doesn't mean that we cannot divide up the space between other numbers. In maths we often do. If we were talking about dividing the space between the numbers 1 and 2, we would place the number 1 before the fraction. This tells us the number of whole numbers or integers before the fraction. For example, on the number line you will see that the red fraction is 7/10, but it comes after 1 but before 2. So we write that as a fraction, 1 whole number, 1 and 7/10. Incidentally, that fraction may also be written as a decimal because we divided the line up in tenths. That can be written as a decimal, which is 1.7. So let's have a look at this square here, this one item. This big box has been divided up into 100 squares. 85 squares are in blue. This can be expressed as a fraction. 85 over 100. The bottom number, denominator, tells us we've cut this box into 100 pieces, and the top number, the numerator, tells us that we are talking about 85 out of those 100 pieces, so 85 hundredths. Can this fraction be reduced or made simpler? The answer is yes. To reduce a fraction, we look and say what number can go into both these numbers. So let's just have a moment to look at reducing fractions. There is a little knack to reducing fractions, so we'll have a look, but first up, let's see if you can reduce this fraction. What number goes in the top number and the bottom number evenly? Let's take a few moments to talk about reducing fractions. The easiest way to reduce a fraction to its simplest form is if the numerator, the top number, goes into the denominator evenly. For example, in this fraction, 7 over 14, it can be reduced to 1 over 2, or a half. because 7 goes into the denominator evenly. That is, 7, the numerator, goes evenly into the denominator. How many times does 7 go into 7? It goes 1. How many times does 7 go into 14? It goes 2, twice. So this fraction can be reduced from 7 over 14 to 1 over 2. To be able to do this efficiently, you must know your multiplication tables. If the numerator, the top number, did not go into the denominator, the bottom number, you must then ask, what number goes into both numerator and denominator evenly? Again, you must know your multiplication tables. You can still reduce a fraction if you do not know your multiplication tables, but it is a slower process. You can see if the prime numbers 2, 3, 5, 7 and 11 go into the numerator and denominator evenly. That is, for example, does 3 go into the top and bottom number? This is a much slower process, as you have to keep testing these numbers on each new fraction until you have arrived at the reduced fraction in its simplest form. And that is saying that you arrive at a fraction that neither 2, 3, 5, 7 or 11 go into either the denominator or the numerator. Throughout maths, there are fractions, percentages and decimals that occur frequently, and you'd do well if you knew what their fraction was in the simplest form. So have a look at this important conversions to memorize. 25% is a percentage. 25% is as a decimal 0.25. As a fraction, it's 25 over 100. And its simplest form, that's 1/4. Knowing the simplest form makes you doing the maths so much easier. 50% is 0.5, or 50 over 100, which is a half as a simplified fraction. And 75% is 0.75, which as a fraction is 75 over 100, and its simplest form is 3/4. You would do well if you could learn these ones that are presented to you here, as it will make your conversions and your performance of maths so much easier and simpler for you.